All right, everyone get ready because today we are diving deep into the mind of a giant, one of history's most influential thinkers, Immanuel Kant.
Ooh, exciting.
And we're tackling his masterpiece, The Critique of Pure Reason.
Oh, wow.
Now, I know what you're thinking. This
Yeah.
isn't exactly like light beach read.
True, that's true.
Yeah.
It's definitely dense. But I promise you, it's worth the mental workout.
Oh, absolutely.
Kant grapples with some of the biggest questions humanity has ever faced. What can we really know? What are the boundaries of reason? And what does it even mean to know something in the first place?
Exactly.
Like, how do we even know anything for sure?
And here's the thing. Kant's ideas, they aren't just for philosophers, locked away in ivory towers.
Right.
They can totally change how we see the world,
Absolutely.
ourselves, and even how we experience daily life.
Yeah, it's really practical in a way, yeah.
So to get us started, let's talk about Kant's famous Copernican revolution
Okay.
in metaphysics. He drops this bombshell right in the preface of the book. Oh, wow.
Comparing his philosophical project to, well, Copernicus totally changing our view of the universe.
It's such a brilliant analogy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, just as Copernicus shifted our whole perspective
Yeah.
by realizing that the Earth revolves around the sun, Kant wants to shift how we think about knowledge itself.
Right.
You see, before Kant came along, most philosophers, they thought our minds were kind of passive,
Okay.
like just conforming to the world.
A blank slate.
Exactly. But Kant flips that idea on its head.
Okay, wait. So instead of our minds being like empty containers just waiting for the world to fill them up, Kant is saying our minds actually shape how we experience reality.
You got it.
Wow.
It's like, imagine you're trying to understand the world, but you're wearing these like colored glasses.
Okay, yeah.
The world itself isn't actually red or blue, right?
Right,
Those colors, they come from the lenses you're looking through.
right.
Kant's saying our minds have lenses too, like built-in structures that shape how we perceive everything. Okay, that's pretty mind-blowing.
Right.
So what are these lenses made of? Like, what are these structures Kant's talking about specifically?
Well, he calls them the a priori conditions of human understanding.
A priori.
A priori basically means before experience.
Okay.
So these aren't things we learn from our senses or from interacting with the world.
Okay.
They're like preloaded software in our brains,
Okay.
making experience possible in the first place.
A priori conditions. So it's like, I already know a triangle has three sides.
Right.
Even before I see any particular triangle in the world, that knowledge is already in my mind somehow.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So Kant identifies two main types of these structures.
Right.
Forms of intuition and categories of understanding.
Okay.
Let's start with the forms of intuition. What are those?
Well, they're like the most fundamental ways our minds organize all that sensory data that's bombarding us constantly.
Okay.
For Kant, space and time are the two pure forms of intuition. We don't experience them as things in themselves, but rather they are the framework through which we experience everything.
So you're saying that space and time aren't objective realities that are out there, but our minds imposing order on sensory chaos?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, starting to see the picture here. What about these categories of understanding then?
Think of categories as these fundamental concepts, like the basic building blocks
Okay.
our minds use to make sense of the world. Substance, causality, possibility. They are like the mental scaffolding, pre-programmed into us, allowing us to make sense of everything around us.
Hold on, substance causality.
Yeah.
I need like a real world example to get this.
Sure. Take causality, for example. We experience events happening in a certain order, right?
Yeah.
Our minds, using this category of causality, link those events together.
Okay.
We understand that one event can cause another.
Right.
Without this category, the world would just be a jumbled mess of random stuff happening.
Okay, so causality is like the mental glue that lets us understand cause and effect.
Exactly. It helps us make sense of the relationships between things.
Makes sense. You mentioned Kant organized these categories. Like, where can we find this masterpiece of categorization?
On page 115 of the critique, you'll find the table's categories,
Okay.
12 in total, neatly grouped into 4 families: quantity, quality, relation, and modality.
Wow, very organized.
It covers everything from basic numerical concepts like unity and plurality to much more complex ideas like possibility and necessity.
So he's not just throwing these concepts around randomly.
Right.
He's saying these categories are fundamental to how we experience, like, anything at all.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a pretty big claim.
It is. And this leads us to one of the most fascinating and challenging parts of the critique. the transcendental dialectic.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
More philosophical jargon.
Uh-huh.
All right, break it down for us.
Okay.
What's so dialectical about this section?
Well, in this section, Kant takes those categories we just talked about
Okay.
and applies them to those huge questions the humans have always pondered: the existence of God, the nature of the soul, free will.
Big stuff.
But he argues that when we try to use these categories beyond the realm of our actual experience, we fall into all sorts of illusions and contradictions.
Okay, so these mental tools that help us navigate everyday life, they aren't equipped to handle those ultimate mysteries. It's like trying to fix a computer with a hammer.
Exactly. Our reason, it loves reaching for those ultimate explanations, but Kant's saying, hey, we got to recognize its limits.
Right.
One of the most striking examples of this is his discussion of the antinomies.
Antinomies. I've definitely never heard that word before. Tell me more.
These are sets of arguments that, on the surface, seem totally valid,
Okay.
yet they lead to completely opposite conclusions.
Wait, so how is that even possible?
Take the question of whether the world had a beginning or has always existed.
Okay, the classic.
Right. Our reason can argue both sides of this issue convincingly.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does reason manage to justify both sides of that question?
Well, on the one hand, we tend to think the world must have had a beginning, because we can't imagine, like, this infinite chain of events stretching back forever, before now.
Yeah.
But then the idea of time starting, it kind of implies that there was a time before time, which makes absolutely no sense.
Ah, I see the dilemma. So what's Kant's final verdict? Did the world have a beginning, or has it always existed?
Well, he says both of those arguments are flawed.
Oh.
They illegitimately apply the category of causality to the whole universe,
Okay.
which is way beyond our actual experience. Kant dissects this brilliantly on pages 417, 457, and 504 of the Critique.
Wow, he really goes deep.
He does.
So he's not giving us any easy answers here.
Right.
He's showing us how limited our reasoning powers can be.
Yeah.
Does this mean we should just give up on those big questions altogether?
Not at all.
No.
Kant's point is to be aware of when reason oversteps its boundaries. We shouldn't abandon those big questions, but we do need to be critical.
Okay.
And recognize when we're venturing beyond the realm of possible experience.
So he's encouraging us to be more self-aware, I guess, about how we use reason.
Right.
Not to let it run wild without sort of checking in on it.
Exactly. Like, don't just blindly accept whatever your reason tells you. Question it, test it.
Very interesting. Okay, so pure reason maybe can't answer those ultimate questions, but is there another way? Does Kant offer any kind of alternative paths?
Well, I remember earlier we touched on how Kant connects, like, God, freedom, and immortality
Right.
to practical reason, specifically morality.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about that.
Well, it's like he's saying, look, even though we can't, like, build a logical proof for these things,
Yeah.
our moral experience might be able to point us in the right direction.
It's like a different way of knowing, right? Not just like cold, hard logic,
Yeah.
but something more tied to our values.
Exactly. It's about what we ought to do, not just what is.
Okay.
And for Kant, morality really hinges on this idea of freedom.
We all experience that sense of, like, I should do this.
Yeah.
A moral obligation, regardless of, what we might want to do at any given moment.
It's like that feeling of, I should help, even if it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
Or I shouldn't lie, even if I could totally get away with it.
Exactly. Kant actually calls this the categorical imperative.
Ooh, another big word.
Yeah, but it's a good one.
Okay.
And this sense of moral obligation, it only makes sense if we're genuinely free to choose our actions.
Right.
Like, if everything was predetermined, then praising or blaming people for their actions wouldn't make any sense.
It'd be like blaming a robot for, like, malfunctioning.
Yeah.
When it was, programmed that way.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is where Kant makes this, like, fascinating leap.
Okay.
Because morality requires freedom.
Yeah.
And we undeniably, like, feel that pull of moral obligation. He argues that we have a rational basis for believing in freedom, even though we can't empirically prove it.
Okay. So it's not blind faith. It's like saying, look, I can't dissect freedom in a lab.
Right.
But I know I'm free because I constantly face these moral choices.
Yeah.
And that feeling of responsibility, it's real.
It's like an undeniable part of the human experience.
Yeah.
Okay, but how does this connect to those even bigger ideas?
Right.
Like God and immortality?
Yeah, I'm still wrapping my head around that part.
Okay, well, for Kant, the ultimate goal of morality is achieving this thing he calls the highest good,
Okay.
which involves both, like being morally worthy and being happy.
Right.
We all strive to do the right thing, but we also, want a good life.
Right. Nobody wants to be a miserable saint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as we all know, in this world, being a good person, it doesn't guarantee happiness.
No, not at all.
Sometimes good people suffer, bad people prosper. It can feel really unfair.
It does make you wonder, like, what's the point, right?
Right.
If the universe doesn't care about morality, why even bother trying?
And that's exactly where Kant suggests that if morality is truly meaningful,
Yeah.
there must be something beyond this empirical world
Okay.
that ensures that ultimately virtue leads to happiness.
So morality is like, it points towards a higher order,
Right.
a realm where things even out, like where being good is actually rewarded.
Precisely.
Wow.
For Kant, this realm requires both God, who ensures that moral order is upheld, and immortality, allowing us to keep striving for that moral perfection beyond our, limited lifespans.
Okay, so we've gone from pure reason kind of bumping into its limits to this idea that morality itself might give us a path to understanding freedom, God, and immortality. It's like Kant is saying, look, logic alone can't get us there, but our moral experience, it kind of lights the way.
It's a different kind of knowing.
Yeah.
It's important to remember, though, Kant isn't claiming to have, ironclad proof of these concepts. He calls it a practical faith.
Okay.
Something reasonable to believe based on our moral nature. We can't know for sure what lies beyond the world of our senses, but it makes moral sense to believe in these things.
Okay.
He's not giving us all the answers, but he's giving us a framework for thinking about these big questions in a new way.
It's definitely a very different approach to these huge questions, that's for sure. I'm really struck by how he, acknowledges the limits of reason without just dismissing it entirely.
Right.
He's not afraid to grapple with the really hard stuff.
Yeah. And that intellectual honesty is one of the things that makes Kant so impactful, even today. Even if we don't agree with all his conclusions.
Right.
His method, being rigorous, questioning assumptions, grappling with those complex ideas, that's the heart of philosophy.
So we've covered Kant's Copernican revolution. We explored these fascinating mental tools, forms of intuition, and categories of understanding. We've seen how in the transcendental dialectic, he shows us the illusions of pure reason,
Right.
while also suggesting this moral path to understanding those big ultimate mysteries.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add before we move on to sort of our final reflections on all of this?
Yeah, I think it's worth emphasizing that Kant isn't just this historical figure. His work is still so incredibly relevant today, especially in our world of information overload, fake news, competing narratives. Kant's call for critical thinking, it's more crucial than ever.
Absolutely. Yeah, we need to be really smart about all the information that's out there, question what we hear and see, and really engage in thoughtful debate.
Have those critical thinking skills sharpened.
Right. Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into Kant's critique of pure reason,
Yeah.
I think it's clear that this isn't just some old book gathering dust on a shelf.
Oh, definitely not.
It's a living, breathing work with ideas that are just as powerful and relevant today as they were, centuries ago.
It really is. It's amazing how much it still resonates with us today.
Yeah. Yeah. And we covered some pretty dense territory from Kant's mind-blowing idea that, our minds shape our experience of reality.
Right, not the other way around.
To those mental tools, like the categories he talks about.
Yeah.
And the limits of pure reason. And that really interesting link between morality and the big questions about existence itself.
Yeah, the whole point of it all.
Right. And it's amazing how he manages to weave it all together, into this coherent system.
It's like a grand tapestry, isn't it? With all these intricate threads.
Yeah, he's like a philosophical architect, constructing this grand and intricate system of thought.
Yeah, he's very systematic in his thinking.
And what's really remarkable, I think, is his commitment to intellectual honesty. He doesn't shy away from those really tough questions.
No, he embraces the challenge.
Even when the answers aren't clear-cut and simple,
He's not afraid of the gray areas.
Yeah. He's like, let's explore those shadowy corners of our minds, even if it makes us a little uncomfortable.
He pushes us to go beyond our comfort zones.
Yeah.
Intellectually speaking.
And that's what makes Kant so valuable, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He pushes us to be more rigorous in our thinking.
Definitely.
To question those assumptions.
Yeah.
To really accept that reality might be much more complex than we initially think.
To look beyond the surface.
He's like a personal trainer for our brains.
Uh-huh. I love that analogy.
Challenging us to really flex those critical thinking muscles.
Yeah, to give our minds a good workout.
And, it's not just philosophy that's been influenced by Kant, right?
Right.
His ideas have had, a huge impact on fields like psychology, physics, even literature.
Yeah, his influence is widespread.
His notion that the mind shapes our experience of reality has been really influential in how we understand perception and consciousness and, the nature of the self.
Like who we are and how we fit into the world.
And we can't forget his emphasis on universal moral principles.
Right.
Which are still relevant to today's ethical debates about human rights and social justice and bioethics.
Kant's work is a touchstone for so many important conversations we're having today.
Yeah, it's like a foundation for ethical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, even if someone never actually reads the entire critique, which, let's be honest, is a pretty daunting task for anyone.
It's not an easy read.
There are so many other ways to engage with his ideas, right?
Yeah, there are. There are introductory texts, commentaries, podcasts like ours.
Right.
There are even online courses now.
Exactly. There's this whole world of resources out there to make Kant more accessible, to break it down.
Yeah, you don't have to be a scholar to understand his ideas.
And the payoff is huge. I mean, engaging with these ideas, it just expands your horizons,
It really does. It opens up your mind to new possibilities.
Yeah, and it challenges you to see the world in a whole new way.
To think differently.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, if, as Kant suggests, our minds actually shape our experience of reality, what does that mean for how we see the world and our place in it?
That's a really powerful question.
It is. It's something to ponder.
Makes you think about how we're all, in a sense, co-creating our own realities.
Yeah.
Both individually and collectively, right?
Right.
And it raises questions about our ethical responsibilities.
Definitely. If we're shaping our world, what kind of world are we creating?
Yeah, are we building a world that's just and compassionate and sustainable?
Big questions.
These are questions that go, way beyond the pages of the critique of pure reason.
Yeah, they extend into our lives and our actions.
And that each of us needs to wrestle with.
To grapple with.
But Kant, he gives us this really rich and incredibly rewarding framework for exploring them. He gives us the tools to think critically and to engage with these questions in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. Sometimes the most important insights, they come from asking those really tough questions.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Kant's critique of pure reason. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep thinking.